everybody. In this video, I'm going to talk about why I think our society is so melancholic. And I think we can kind of see this in movies and series where actually being the depressed person or the melancholic person is actually cool. And I think it is cool to a certain extent. I think we see this a lot in like maybe Japanese anime where like there's always a character that's kind of like, melancholic or like depressed, and that's kind of cool, like they're like the cool character. But I also think that just in general series have had this like melancholic element added to them, right? I think ever since last decade in the 2010s, maybe with like Breaking Bad and Thanos and like Endgame and Avengers, like there's a certain sympathy for the negative, right? For like the villain, right? It's like the Disney princess villains, like they're cool now, right? And it's kind of this idea of, for me, it's like balancing things out, right? With the hero, right? So we get the hero and the villain, and we look at both of their purposes. But my problem with this notion is that we've now gone to that extreme and we've kind of stayed there, right? So my question is, why is our world so melancholic? And what do I mean by melancholic? First of all, I mean indifferent. So like I don't care, right? Like they say, what's the different? What are the definitions of indifference and ignorance or something like that? And someone says, I don't care and I don't know, right? So indifferent, I don't care. Boring, right? So everyone is like bored, but no one's doing anything about it. Like life is kind of boring in these times, with a dab of reflective depression, right? So my definition of melancholic is indifferent, boring, with a dab of reflective depression, right? So that defect, reflective depression is like I'm kind of reflecting on my life, right? I'm doing some introspection, but it's accompanied with like depression, with like the sadness, right? Now, so for me, I was like thinking, what is behind melancholy? And I was actually reading Sartre's origin book where he talks about life as when he was a kid. And and this just came across, right? Just as I was thinking about melancholy. And so melancholy is the emotion of like sadness, right? It's like an introspective sadness. It's like a somber mood, right? And Sartre says in a part of this book, he's in this state of melancholy due to disappointment, right? And I was like, wow, that makes sense, right? So that idea is credited to him. So what is behind melancholy ultimately? It's disappointment, right? It's basically feeling like what you have wanted to accomplish, you haven't accomplished, or hasn't come true, or hasn't been a reality, right? So then the next question, and it's kind of like peeling onions, like going back and back, cause effect, right? What does or where does disappointment come from, right? In this case, disappointment comes from unmet expectations, right? So you have expectations, like let's say you have goals in life and they're not met, right? You fall short of them, and that leads to disappointment, like naturally and inevitably, right? You have goals, you don't reach your goals, and you feel disappointed, right? Okay, and then we can ask, well, how are unmet excuse me, how are unmet expectations born? Where does that come from? How do you get to not achieving goals, right? Well, you get there because you have hope for something, right? You have hope in achieving your dreams, your goals, or for the circumstances, not thanks to you, not due to your responsibility, but maybe thanks to external circumstances or other people. You expect things to change ultimately, right? Mm. So this happens obviously after a deadline, right? Which you give it. So you say after, and I think this happens more or less in like a weird way, because you don't say by May 2025 I have to do this. No, like it's just, but you have a temporal sense, right? And after some time, undefined time, but after some time, you will reach that disappointment level if your goals aren't reached, right? So you give it that deadline, right? You have hope for something. The deadline time comes, more or less approximation, right? And you see no change taking place. That's when you feel disappointment, right? So we can say that melancholy is feeling this disappointment over numerous moments, over numerous times, right? So it's because melancholy has a quality to it that is persistent. It's continual, right? Like, let's say sadness or depression. Well, I think depression, clinical depression, is lasting, but I don't think it has this reflective mood, or maybe it does. But melancholy has that reflective quality. So, but it's not like just, one day. It's persistent, and it's maybe because of multiple failed attempts at reaching your goals, right? Or at having things change. um, so yeah, melancholy is feeling this disappointment numerous times, and this could be potentially due to an excess of uncalculated optimism or projects, right? So I say uncalculated because the opposite of that are is like calculated risks, right? Or you take calculated decisions, or you set for yourself calculated goals, right? Like planned out goals. How are you going to achieve these goals, right? You just don't. And I think a lot of us will set goals in our mind, right, for our life, or we'll set expectations, right? Going back to the notion of expectations, we'll set those expectations, but with no clear trajectory, right? With no clear process or no clear plan to achieve those goals, right? And obviously that's like setting yourself up for failure, right? So you will feel that disappointment, and if you do it numerous times, you will feel that disappointment numerous times, and that's what will create the feeling of melancholy, right? Of just being like, I don't care about anything because nothing goes well, right? um so yeah, melancholy is disappointment continually being lived. Other characteristics of melancholy is that to think of melancholy is to think of the end, right? So you feel like, after all of these unmet expectations, you feel like you've reached the end, right? There's no more after that. Like you've kind of, so it's kind of like, in a sense, uh, pre-death, basically. Like it's like how old people feel, right? Disappointed, melancholy, because they're probably gonna die soon, especially if like old people are ill, like at the hospital or whatever, and they're reflecting back on their past, right? And they see all of that, but they have that sense of the end, right? Like it's the end. There's no more. Because when you don't have that sense of the end, you still have hope, right? And you could call that stupid because you're not going to achieve anything because you haven't, based on your experience, right? But it's still there, right? It could be like stupid optimism, where you're gonna still like continue down the road, right? You're not at the end. So there is no notion of beginning in melancholy, right? There's only the notion of the end. Because if there were a notion of the beginning, but there could be, because they say the end is the beginning is the end, right? And that's like the circle of life. I mean, if you really think about it, the only way to get out of that feeling of melancholy is to situate yourself back at the beginning and say, okay, this is not the end. This is the beginning of something new, right? Of my recovery, of healing, or whatever, right? Or maybe, I reflect back on what I've done, the mistakes I've made, and now I try to correct those going into the future, right? So it's my new beginning, right? Like another level, like the spiral. Um, so there is also no notion of cause, like cause and effect. I think the whys, right? Why has it happened? I think this is important because you don't focus on why things happen. And when you don't focus on the why, on the causes more specifically, um, you don't have the opportunity to learn from the experience, right? If you just look at the consequences, in this case, the unmet expectations, but not reflecting back on why things weren't met, why those expectations weren't met, or what went wrong, what you did wrong with the situation, what was the cause, or what were the causes of those effects, right? when you don't focus on that, you're not growing, you're not learning, and you're just gonna stay stuck on the effect, right? On the consequence, on what happened, right? So I think it's like a solution to shift into the cause, right? And I say there's no notion of cause and effect because obviously you would have to consider your cause, right? You're just noticing the effects. You're just noticing what went wrong, what happened, right? But you're not learning. You're not analyzing. You're not connecting, right? The dots and saying, oh, it happened because of this, so now I'm going to correct that for next time, right? And then you situate yourself at the beginning, right, to avoid that feeling of melancholy. Um, so yeah, in this case, it is deep reflection, but with no aim, right? Because I think going back to that idea of cause and effect, if you situate yourself in the cause and you ask yourself why, and you figure out the whys, right? Potential whys, why did this happen, and you kind of get a better picture of what went wrong. Um, you're able to focus by focusing on the past, we could say, but the real past, the causes, you can kind of like focus on the future, right? And then you have an aim. But if you don't have that aim and you're just focusing like on the effects in that past, like why things went, I mean, not why, but what went wrong, there's no aim, right? You're just gonna stay there. It's like being like in the mud, right? Just being in the puddle, getting wet out in the rain, and that's it, right? You look cool, and you know, many artists I think do that because it looks cool. But I mean, if you're not making money off it, it's just, you know, impeding your progress. You know, you're just being, it's an obstacle. So yeah, and Jodorowsky says something important. I think he was talking about loneliness or anxiety, but he said something that kind of made me think about this melancholy thing, or that, you know, thinking about melancholy brought this idea in, which is you are simply living the memory of something, right? So he said, like, when you're alone, when you feel lonely, it's because you're reliving a memory, right? So you have to let go of that memory and then just take care of things that are um, out of your head, because you're living in your head, right? You're only worried about yourself, and that's why you feel lonely. So you have to like, but that's in relation to lonely, but it could apply to the notion of melancholy, right? But again, it's you're living the memory of what happened, right? But I think he said of a person or something like that. But anyway, you're living the memory of what happened, but you're not focusing on the causes, on the whys, and obviously that doesn't let you focus on the future either, right? So what is my take, my conclusive remarks on melancholy? I don't agree with it. I know in some sense it's the root of the existential philosophy, especially in relation to Jean-Paul Sartre. And you could say I was a little melancholic in my early 20s, mid 20s, because I thought it was cool, right? I think a lot of people do it because it's cool. A lot of people really live it, but a lot of people take on that persona because it seems cool, right? To be like that gothic, that emo guy, you know, like kind of depressed. It's kind of cool, but and again, I think it's a good notion to consider every once in a while, you know, to kind of bring balance into this other, you know, compared to this other, like the hero optimism, everything is beautiful and pink and bright and awesome. You know, I think it's important to balance those two things out. You know, like they say SpongeBob is that dichotomy of like SpongeBob and Squidward, right? SpongeBob is all optimism and Squidward is all like grouchy and like melancholic. So people like to see that combination, you know. But if you only stick with one thing, that's bad, right? So personally, it doesn't suit me well because I'm more of an optimistic person. And nowadays, I don't really think I like feeling like that, melancholic. I mean, I do at times, but it's like more of a reflective, introspective mood, right? And again, it doesn't lead me to the causes. It's just like feeling that emotion, which is kind of useless, but necessary paradoxically once in a while. And to finish this video off, I want to say that I think we live in very melancholic times, essentially comfortable times, right? Like in the middle right now of 2024, June 6, 2024. We have the luxury of looking back as a forever modern, right, and technological civilization with no clear aim for the future while we're carrying around our disappointments, right? So we can see this with like the governments, with the countries, with businesses, with there's a lot of disappointment. Like I just watched recently Quiet on Set, right? Like the Nickelodeon documentary. So a lot of things are coming out. I think it's kind of like the moment of truth. I've said that before in some videos, and all of the things that are coming out are disappointing things, right? People are disappointed, so that's why people are living more in the macro, like view of things, right? People are living in disappointing times, hence melancholic times, right? And people like to see melancholic content, right? Series, movies, stories that have that melancholic element to it, right? So yeah, I think it's something. It's kind of it's a sort of disease of our times, of our modern times, but it's also a luxury because only people that are comfortable, like back in the day when everybody, when civilization wasn't as developed as it is now, I think people that could experience melancholy were people that were like rich, right? Or the elites, right? Where they had nothing to do, they were comfortable. But if you were like poor and you were, on your grind and working hard, you weren't able to feel melancholic, right? Because you had to think about survival. So yeah, I think we live in a comfortable society nowadays, and we're able to relax and kind of give ourselves that luxury of feeling melancholic, right? Or of feeling melancholy. I hope I pronounced that right, right? Okay, well, anyway, that's all I got for this video. Let me know what you think about melancholy. Do you think we live in melancholic times or not? And I'll see you in the next one, all right? Peace.